QSO Today, episode 407, Arun Kumar, W8ARU. My thanks to ICOM America for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. I am attempting to clean up the QSO Today mailing list to reduce its monthly costs, but also to be sure that only the people that want emails from QSO Today are getting them. I am sensitive to people who complain that their e-inbox is never under control. If you see my message, please use the form to resubscribe to my messages or unsubscribe if you don't want email from me. Either way, this will benefit us all. If you want to be on the email list because you're not on the list to hear about the podcast, the expo, and soon the academy, please use the subscribe button on the bottom of the show notes page. Arun Kumar, W8ARU, builds most of the gear that he uses on the air based on a skill set that he learned and became an amateur radio operator in India in the 1960s. This skill set, combined with advanced degrees in engineering, has put Arun on the cutting edge of solar and battery technologies used in big equipment as the world is going green. Arun was also Asher Farhan W8ARU's original mentor, one of the many major contributions that Arun has made to our hobby. W8ARU is my QSO Today. W8ARU, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Arun?
Yes, I am, Eric. How are you?
I am great. Arun, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. I have to let everyone know that you and I met at the FDIM Dayton Hamvention this last month, a month ago, because you were Asher Farhan's W8ARU's companion or sidekick, or he was your sidekick. But anyway, the opportunity to meet you was my great pleasure. And a friend of Asher's is a friend of mine. So I'm so delighted that you agreed to join me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Sure. I was interested in broadcast receivers and just generally electronics ever since maybe about 1955 when I had my hands into my father's old Farnsworth tube radio. And I kept listening to stuff which was generally ham related, but I could never make too much sense out of it because my receiver was not good. But anyway, I built stuff around it. I built a BFO around that radio, and pretty soon I was listening in to CW conversations, and for the life of me, I couldn't make any sense out of it because I knew no CW. And then eventually in around 68, I believe it was, I got my ham radio license. This was when I had just joined college in the city called Ranchi in India. And there was another ham who had just joined a year prior. And he said, why don't you come over and sit for the license exam and then you can get your ticket. So we went over to Calcutta, a great city on the East Coast in India. And I sat for the license exam and I said, I'm going to do 12 words a minute, nothing short, because we had either a 5-word a minute, which was the equivalent to the technician class here, and the 12 words a minute, which was the advanced class. So I sat for the 12 words a minute test, and I got my license around 1968, I believe it was.
You started to develop the interest in electronics and electricity from having this radio, or did that interest develop even earlier when you were a kid?
Well, it was much earlier. I used to fool around with anything which clocks were my favorites. I used to take clocks apart.
Mechanical clocks.
Yes, mechanical clocks. That was the only type that was available there. But I could always take a clock apart and never make it tick. So eventually I did. In fact, we made a few clocks out of pieces of wood, and I filed the gears, and it was quite a lot of fun when I was in school. But that's all I could do.
We know each other, and so I know that you're originally from India. But what was the hometown in India?
It was in a city called Jamshedpur, which is in the East Coast, and it used to be in the state called Bihar, and there was a huge steel company there, and my father used to work there. So I did my schooling there, and then after schooling, I joined college in the state of Bihar, Yeah, it was Jamshedpur. It's the biggest steel town. It's one of the biggest steel manufacturing facilities in India even today.
So India was moving very quickly towards heavy industrialization, high technology in those days.
All my schooling was in a Jesuit school in Jamshedpur by the name of Loyola High School. There, most of my interest in physics came from a professor there, or a Jesuit priest by the name of Father Kirsch. And he taught me just about everything I knew at that time about electronics and electricity and general, hands-on fooling around type activities.
Now, you say that you developed this interest in amateur radio in 1968. Did you know other amateur radio operators in the area where you were?
No, in my area there was none.
Really?
Absolutely none. Jamshedpur city, there was none. Then I did my engineering in a college in a city called Ranchi. There was none. There were no amateur radio operators there. Then finally, a guy whose call sign was WU2ZZ, he joined. And then he said, would you like to take a test? Because you seem to be so interested in amateur radio. I said, sure. And that's when it all started. And that's when I got my ticket in 1968.
What information was there? I mean, obviously this is pre-internet, right? So you could go to the library and probably check out books on amateur radio, but what information did you have on amateur radio in those days?
If I remember right, the first book on amateur radio I saw was in my college library. School, the library had nothing. It had nothing on amateur radio. But in the college library, there was a 1954 edition of the ARRL handbook. And that was the only book on amateur radio I ever saw. And that was absolutely fascinating. I read that from cover to cover at least a dozen times.
You started then this college degree in electronic engineering. Did you have an opportunity to kind of choose a direction in electronics that you wanted to emphasize?
There was a standard 5-year course, and there were fixed subjects. There was communication theory, there was digital electronics, what they call digital electronics. There was a little on microwaves. There was a lot on microwaves, actually. And then mostly it was concentrated on electrical engineering, electrical heavy machinery, design of generators, motors, transformers, and power distribution equipment. And other than that, since I got my ticket, I started working on building my own building my own transmitter at that time.
What was the first receiver then that you used for amateur radio?
That was a Farnsworth 5-tube radio with an external BFO, whatever I had at home.
So you kept the Farnsworth 5-tube?
Yes.
And that was like a 5-tube superhead, like broadcast radio, or it was a general coverage radio?
It was a broadcast. It was general coverage in the sense that it went to 15 meters with great difficulty. 21 megahertz was tops, I think. Yeah, it was a 13-meter band. It would go and touch it, nothing beyond that. It was a small, dinky little affair, roughly about a foot wide, about 8 inches high, and about 6 to 8 inches deep. And it would cook. It would get hot like heck. And it would drift all over the place. And the fun part is the tuning knob was very coarse. So I got hold of some gears from some toys which I had, the wind-up toys. And with a threaded rod, I made myself a worm and worm wheel reduction. And the whole thing rested, if I remember right, on my dad's old license plate. It was all bolted onto that, and the receiver was behind it. And I somehow managed to use that for fine-tuning this receiver. It was fun. All I had to do was tap the table, and frequency would go off by 100 kilohertz, I guess. It was fun.
What was the first transmitter?
The first transmitter I built was, the oscillator was a CW transmitter. It had a Echo Lima 84 oscillator, Echo Lima 84 doubler, and a single 807 tube, which I got from one of the guys whom I met in a city called Bangalore, which you must be familiar with. And he's still alive. He's still a ham. He doesn't live in Bangalore. He lives in a coffee plantation off Bangalore. His call sign is VU2 Tango Sugar, with a guy by the name of Ganesh. And I was kind of floating around Bangalore, because we used to go there on holidays. My grandfather used to live in Bangalore. So every summer holidays, I'd land up there and then ask questions about radio and this and that till everybody got tired of me. Then finally, one of my uncles said, "Hey, why don't you go up the street about 4 miles north and you'll find this guy with a lot of wires sticking out of his house." So I did that, and it turned out that this fellow's name was Ganesh.
Well, it just so happens, Arun, that I interviewed Ganesh in episode 272. Would you say he was your first ham radio Elmer?
He had a transmitter at home, yes. And that way he was an Elmer because he let me use it.
It's great. I think Ganesh is still around, so...
He is there. He's there. I talked to him a few months back. Not on the radio. I talked to him on the phone. But he's definitely around.
What was the availability of parts? I mean, where did you find parts for the projects that you were doing?
Zip. Z-I-P, zip. Nothing was available at that time. He had 2 807 tubes. He said, "I can sell you one." I said, "Sure, I'll buy one." Then I said, "What do I do for a base?" He said, "Well, that's going to be your problem." So I made a base for that using a telescoping antenna tube. Cut that tube up into segments and shoved it into the pins because an 807 has got 2 thick filament pins and a bunch of thin. I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was a 7-pin tube, if I remember right. And it had a plate cap. So a piece of brass folded around with a bolt across it was my contact for the plate. And I didn't have a transformer to get the 750 volts which was needed. So what I did was I took 250 volts, which was coming from the AC line, and doubled it. And I got about 500 volts. The only catch there is that if I reversed my power plug at any time, I would go up in smoke because it would make everything live.
Yeah.
It would either hurt me or it would blow all the fuses in the house. So I used to run around with one of these neon bulb testers in my pocket. So you keep touching everything to make sure that the chassis is not live. So that's how I got started. And the EL84 was a standard output tube, was a audio output tube. I don't know whether there's a US equivalent for that. There must be, but it's a glass tube about 2 centimeters in diameter and about 8 centimeters long. 9-pin. Yes, it was a 9-pin tube. And that was a 7 megahertz oscillator, followed by a second EL84, which was a doubler to 14. And the 807 was at 14. A regular linear. I wound all the coils, got capacitors from regular broadcast capacitors, ripped every other plate out to make it slightly higher voltage. And the thing worked. And the very first contact I remember I got was JA8DJJ. Yeah, that was the very first contact I had, yes. Japan Alpha 1 Delta Japan. And that was on CW. And the first time I keyed that transmitter, this contact showed up. So I was absolutely thrilled.
What were the bands like in India with your rig in those days?
I didn't have much of a choice. I could either operate 7 megahertz or 14 megahertz. It's 40 or 20 meters. And 20 I would prefer because there was a sizable amount of Russian CW traffic on 20. And most of my contacts were made on 20 meters. And since I was running only, I had a CW transmitter, that's it. So I wasn't making any more, I couldn't talk, I couldn't do anything else. And at 7 megahertz, there was a lot of noise. So I would be able to receive a few signals, a few Indian signals on 7. For 14, I had a few Indian contacts and a bunch of Russian contacts, dozens of Japanese contacts, and occasionally a few US contacts, and a bunch of 4x4s. 4x4s, and then there was a bunch of South African contacts which I had.
Yeah, so the 4x4s you refer to are the Israelis.
Yes.
I guess we're now 4x1s and 4x5s as well as 4x4s.
Well, at that time, I think there was only 4x4.
That's very possible. What happened after that? You got this bachelor's degree, this ham radio license. How did this all proceed? You went for a higher degree?
Yes, I went for a master's. But by the time I went for my master's, I got called in to work for the Ministry of Defense. So they sponsored my master's degree. That was in a college in a city called Kharagpur, which is very close to Calcutta. And that was in one of the most premier institutions in India called the Indian Institute of Technology. And I didn't have a rig. I didn't have nothing. They had an old radio club there The call sign was VU2 Quack Quack. I mean, they used to call themselves Quack Quack because they didn't do diddly. They'd sit and quack outside the room, I suppose. They had no transmitter. They had an old AR-88 receiver, which I souped up and I did all kinds of fun stuff with it, and then built my own transmitter there for them. That was again 14 megahertz only, 14 megahertz CW. But there was a much more availability of parts. The reason for that is there used to be a Second World War air base very close to this college. If you remember, there was a movie some years back called Merrill's Marauders, and that was about the Burma operation when the U.S. landed a bunch of troops in Burma to get it out of Japanese occupation. That air base was just next to this college, and I had full reign of the equipment which was in the air base. Of course, most of it was destroyed and beyond repair. I could salvage only a few large power supplies from there, a few old chassis, which I hastily converted into 807 amplifiers, and I got my station going.
And now this message from ICOM America. Heard it, worked it, logged it. This summer, keep your competitive contesting edge with ICOM. Our high-powered base stations cut through pile-ups, letting you work the bands and log those contacts. Contest from the comfort of your home or remotely with the RSBA1 app. The ICOM IC7851 gives you a new window into the RF world, and its on-air excellence is unparalleled. With faster processors, high input gain, high display resolution, and a cleaner signal, it's truly the pinnacle of HF perfection. Features include dual receivers, digital IF filters, memory keyer, digital voice recorder, high-resolution spectrum waterfall display, enhanced PC connectivity, and an SD memory card slot. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants. This high-performance SDR can pick out faint signals in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that has changed the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, and dual digicell. Create your own band openings with the ICOM IC9700. This transceiver brings direct sampling to the UHF-VHF weak signal world. This all-mode transceiver is loaded with innovative features that are sure to keep you busy that include faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. This has become the new de facto standard as a baseband rig for microwave operation as well. Features include 4.3-inch touchscreen color TFT LCD, real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, smooth satellite operation with 99 satellite channels, dual watch operation, and full duplex operation in satellite mode. The ICOM IC7300 is a high-performance, innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed expectations. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing inherent noise in different IF stages. The IC7300 changed the way entry-level HF is designed. It is the go-to rig in my station now, and I love it. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. Just know that you'll be very pleased with one of these fine rigs to enhance your contest, DX, and general ham radio operation in your station. Be sure to check out these ICOM rigs and their full line of base stations and portable radios at an amateur radio dealer near you. And when you make that purchase of a fine ICOM rig, be sure to tell your dealer that you heard about it here on the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. You also developed some skills in terms of fabricating mechanical parts as well?
Yeah, I used to do a lot of sheet metal work because we had ready-made chassis from old radios and whatever was lying in that place, the airbase. And I took all the parts apart and then, redesigned the whole layout such that I could build my transmitter on it. And I do have some photographs of some of the transmitters which I built for the Oscar work, which I will send you. those are totally haywire. They start from one end of the table and go to the other end of the table. But I did get through Oscar 6 consistently for quite a while. So thing worked.
So what happened after that? How did your ham radio life proceed? How did your professional life proceed?
So 72 to 74, I was in this master's program that was in microwave and radar engineering, and did a sizable amount of work on what is commonly referred to as phased array radar right now, which is ubiquitous. I mean, just about everything is a phased array radar, whether it's your cell phone or it's 5G or whatever it is. So I worked a lot on that with military applications. And then I graduated to work with the Ministry of Defense in the city called Hyderabad. That's where Farhan is from, actually. And that's how I got to meet him. So I worked there in their establishment on microwave receivers, microwave transmitters, transponders, and very ruggedized electronic equipment which could take a sizable amount of shock and beating. So that's about all I can tell you about my professional life in Hyderabad. Well, in the initial portion. Then as far as ham radio is concerned, we, in Kharagpur itself, built this Oscar 6 transmitter, 145.95 megahertz to be exact. And that was crystal control. And we didn't have crystals. The only crystal I had was a 7.9 megahertz crystal from some scrap. It was an FT243 crystal, which I etched up to 8.108333 megahertz. That was a lot of fun. Take the crystal apart from the holder, hold it in a pair of plastic tweezers, dip it into hydrofluoric acid, which I got from a department which was doing glass work, because hydrofluoric acid is used for etching glass. I thought it would work on quartz, and it did. So you stick it inside, shake it around for 15 minutes, take it out, wash it, dry it, check the frequency. And I did that for a week, and I got up to the 8.108333 megahertz. We had frequency counters in my college lab, so I was lucky. I was able to start off with 8.10833, triple it again, triple it a third time, 18x, triple it, and then double it to get to 145.95. And it worked. 7-element Yagi, which we fabricated from pieces of pipe. I'll send you a photograph of that. You'll find that quite interesting.
You guys were able to build stuff, get it on the air with metal washers. Whatever it is that you could find, you were able to turn that into radio stuff. That's what's so amazing. Asher Farhan's quite a bit younger than you are.
Yes.
When you met him, was he a young kid getting interested into radio, and were you involved in that process at all?
I'll tell you what exactly happened. Once I left the Ministry of Defense, I started working with my own computer company. We used to make 8-bit computers, CPM-based computers. Then we used to make PCs, and we sold a lot of PCs. We sold a lot of 8-bit microcontroller-based computers, all CPM or MPM or Unix-based. We built all those in a location. And at that time, I hired Farhan. He just showed up at my door and he said, look, I'm interested in electronics and I'm also interested in ham radio. I said, oh my God, we got somebody whom I can work with. I put him through the ropes in the company. He did a lot of fabrication work for us. He did a lot of circuit design work for us. And then on the side, we did some ham radio stuff, either from my house or from his place. And we built a few rigs. The first sideband rig I built was, again, taking a bunch of crystals and trying to make a crystal filter out of it. And I was successful. I was able to work on sideband for quite a few years, actually. And of course, CW was my mainstay. He was involved. In fact, all his initial, starting from drilling, soldering, chassis fabrication, circuit design, and what have you, was done when he was working with me.
I sometimes think that the problem we have in ham radio is that the availability of everything is so immediate now that the fact that you don't have to scrape for stuff means that you don't necessarily develop the skill sets
Absolutely.
that make you a great engineer.
Absolutely. I still haven't gotten into that habit of just going out and buying things, plugging it in, connecting an antenna and running it. I insist on building everything.
So most of your gear is homebrew?
Most of my gear, the mainstay here is a K3 transceiver. But my VHF transmitter, VHF receiver, antenna, satellite tracking antenna, all that stuff is built at home.
This tracking system, this is because you have an interest in AMSAT satellites, and so the latest one, you track the latest ones, or whatever happens to be flying?
I can track any. Whatever is going on, I can track a bunch. Using SAT PC32, this thing merely follows whatever satellite is available at the given time.
So PC32 is a software program that kind of aims the antenna?
Yes, SAT PC32, Sugar Alpha Tango, Papa Charlie 32. It's a standard program, which is, I think it was written in Germany, and you just give it the coordinates of your particular satellite, or what they call the TLEs, the two-line element set, and then pick up the appropriate satellite from a bunch, and then it follows it, it tracks it. Then you can even use it to Doppler shift your receiver, but all those fancy things I don't use. I just use it to track the antenna. That way you get, instead of occasional contact, you can get a continuous contact for the duration of the pass.
What mode do you operate when you're doing satellite contacts?
I have done all of them, digital, FM, as well as CW. But I prefer CW. It's more fun. I still run CW.
Yeah, because I would think that CW on a satellite pass is like doing a contest, right? Or trying to get the contest station before he disappears?
Exactly. You have 6 minutes normally on the best pass from horizon to horizon.
Are you in a place in Michigan that gives you the ability to see the horizon on both sides?
Yes.
So you're on a hill?
No, not really. Michigan is flatland, so wherever you are, you're not very high.
I see.
But it is quite forgiving. Even if you point it generally horizontal, you do get to pretty close to the horizon.
Okay, well, the fact now is that you are in Michigan, and you're an entrepreneur, and you've had a couple of businesses. You have a business now. How did you find your way to Michigan?
See, in 1991, I told you there was this guy by the name of Stan Ovshinsky who was paying a visit to India to a company which I was consulting for. Then he said that would be a good idea for you to come over and pay us a visit. So I visited him in 91. This was a factory in Troy, Michigan. And he offered me a job. So he said, why don't you come over and work for us? So before I knew what was happening, within a week, I got my, what they call the H-1B visa. And he said, why don't you go back to India, bring your family over? I said, sure. And that's when we moved to the U.S. So I worked with him on the solar business I was in the solar division. I worked with him for 30 years nearly, till the company went under around 2012 because of, very intense competition from Chinese solar manufacturers. We are the first people to make what they call amorphous silicon multi-junction cells for converting sunlight into electricity. And we had, I think the final tally was 40 gigawatts of panels installed worldwide. So that's how I got into Michigan.
You have some patents, I think.
Yes, I have patents on instrumentation for measuring and improving performance of these amorphous cells.
Do you think the United States has the raw materials and resources to actually start building their own solar panels?
Well, we used to, we still do. But it's a bit more expensive. It's cheaper to buy panels from, let's say, Hong Kong or China at the present time.
At the present time. And that's only because their labor costs.
And it's very highly subsidized there. Well, they set up their groundwork many years back. You see, to manufacture a crystalline silicon cell, you need to grow crystalline silicon, and that process takes quite a few years from start to production. You have to melt a bunch of silicon and pull crystals out of it. And by the time you get pure crystalline silicon, it's a few years. And all these foundries were started in China so many years back. And right now, they've got tons and tons of crystalline silicon. I mean, semiconductor-grade crystalline silicon available for the solar market.
Oh, so that's very interesting. So in order for America to establish a competitive solar panel industry, then it would actually have to start laying those foundations now, even to be able to have some production output a few years from now.
Well, they already do. There is quite a few places, but they have other technologies. Crystalline silicon is not the only answer. Cadmium telluride is another, which is made by a company in Ohio by the name of First Solar. and they make excellent cells, very high efficiency cells, and they sell quite a lot. But cadmium and tellurium are not they're toxic materials, so there's a problem with disposal and what have you. But crystalline silicon, monocrystalline, polycrystalline silicon, the amount which is made in the U.S. is not even close to what China produces at the present time.
That's kind of an interesting stray because I think we're all talking about, renewable energy right now as a way to generate at least some of the electricity that we use. But it seems to me that the issues of raw materials, the availability of raw materials, getting those raw materials to the manufacturing sites, it seems like those are also challenges.
They are, yes. To make it cost effective, it's not all, well, it's more expensive making it in the U.S. at the present time.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. Your favorite operating mode is CW, but it also seems to me, at least from what I could tell, is that you also like to do contests. Do you enter contests?
Yes. In fact, next weekend there is this field day, and I'll be operating CW, I think, next Saturday afternoon through Sunday lunchtime at least. Yeah,
it runs about 24 hours, right? Or slightly less. Do you belong to an amateur radio club?
Yes. Yeah, the local club here is the ARU Communication Club, or the ARU Club in Ann Arbor. You may have met or you may have talked to KB6NU.
Sure.
Dan, yep. He's a stalwart here as far as CW and the ARU Club and, club activities are concerned.
Well, Dan was also a guest of the QSO Today podcast, so...
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I did see one of
I'll put a link to his interview in the show notes page as well. We're seeing Dan now. He works for ARDC as their public relations guy.
Right.
He's probably as you are, a very well-known ham in Ann Arbor.
I'm not very well known because I keep to myself most of the time.
You're going to be very well known after this podcast.
Maybe, yes.
And do you take a leadership position in your club?
Not really. I've not been keeping excellent health. That's why I avoid my... First of all, we haven't had a regular meeting in, I think, as long as 2 years. Most of them have been on the air. I mean, it's been on Zoom. And unfortunately, my morning place of work is about 65 miles from where I live. So I am not able to make those meetings. But once they start meeting in person, I think I will start joining them again.
Now, you have your own business now. What is that business?
We make battery packs, lithium battery packs for things like forklift trucks, for electric buses, trucks, heavy-duty vehicles. We don't get into the regular general automotive space, which is, cars and things like that. Electric cars we don't do, but we do motive, but non-automotive. That is forklifts.
Right, but these are big batteries.
Yes, these are big packs. These are 48-volt packs all the way to 700 volts.
If you don't mind saying what's under the hood of one of these batteries. I heard that someone said in a Tesla battery that there's a bunch of these little 1.5 volt or 3 volt cells, all packed together. If we opened up one of these battery packs, would we find hundreds of these cells all bonded together?
Yes. The workhorse is something called an 18650, which is a lithium-ion battery, which is 16 millimeters in diameter and 85 millimeters long. That's why it's called a 16850. And these nominally run 3.7 volts. Minimum is 2.7, maximum is 4.2 fully charged. 3.7 is kind of their sweet running spot. So there are thousands of these in series and parallel to get to 350 volts.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
So you take them by the truckload.
We buy them by the truckload, yes.
Do these batteries also have then charging circuits or circuits to manage them?
Yes, exactly. These do need to be run very carefully. If the temperature goes above 55 degrees centigrade, you're going to lose the battery in either a total thermal runaway, or it'll be impossible to charge them once they get that hot, because they'll get only hotter when you charge them. And once again, if it's very cold, if it's below minus 17 centigrade, it's difficult. It's impossible to get any power from that. So you got to have some sort of a scheme to monitor the voltage and the temperature of each parallel pack. There are so many cells in one parallel pack, or what they call a module, and those are connected in series to get to 350 volts or 700 volts or whatever it is your vehicle runs at. So you got to monitor these things very carefully in the running condition and monitor how much residual charge is left, so you can indicate when would be a good time to recharge these batteries. And while you recharge it, if the individual parallel stacks are at different states of charge, you've got to make sure that you do not put too much voltage across cells which are weaker. If you do that, you are liable to blow the place up. So you got to do what they call balancing, cell balancing, passive or active cell balancing. And all that is handled by the battery management system. And every one of these packs has one. And the BMS also communicates to the rest of the vehicle, like the engine controller and things like that, or your dashboard, to make sure that you extract maximum power from the pack, maximum energy from the pack, and make sure that you bring it to a condition such that it doesn't go below a 10 or a 15% state of charge. Otherwise, if you go below 2.7 volts, you have just a lump of lithium under your hood, and that's no good.
It seems to me that 55 degrees C is pretty hot, but there could be parts of the world where you might have poorer performance because it's so hot, if you were out in the Saudi desert or...
Yes. So what you do is you have a cooling system which is connected to each one of these cells somehow. I mean, there are different ways of doing it, but the most common way is to put it on a aluminum platform and push refrigerated liquid through it so that the temperature does not exceed 55 degrees centigrade or 50 degrees centigrade. And once it gets to too low a temperature, then you push hot fluid through the cooling plates so that the battery warms up before you do anything with it.
So there's a whole environmental control system around the batteries. Is this true of a Tesla battery?
Yes. You should see some of the YouTube videos on people who have taken apart Tesla packs, or any pack for that matter, and it is phenomenally complicated.
And when the system doesn't work, that's when we see those spectacular videos on YouTube of a Tesla car burning to the ground.
Most of them are usually nothing to do with Tesla.
Well, it just so happens they always catch them with their phones out in the field.
That's right.
Right, it doesn't have to be Tesla necessary, but it happens to be a spectacular battery meltdown.
We have test facilities for these packs, and I have seen my share of spectacular events.
How do we dispose of these in the future, or can we recycle? Can lithium batteries be recycled in order to make new battery packs?
Yes, there are people who are doing that right now. They are removing the outside the nickel content and then recycling the lithium which is inside there. But that's much slower than what... See, the thing is, lithium is a very small percentage of what goes into the pack. Most of it is other materials, carbon, nickel, plastic. Taking all that apart is the thing is, it's a lithium, an 18650 is made like a capacitor, like an electrolytic capacitor. It's an anode and a cathode with a separator in between, which is wrapped around on itself and shoved into a can. So it's quite a nuisance taking it apart. But people have managed to do that, and there is quite a thriving business right now in getting these cells recycled into their original into their constituent metals.
Right. I mean, I see this as an opportunity for an entrepreneur to, or entrepreneurs to be able, as we become more dependent on electric vehicles and other battery-operated devices, to recycle these batteries.
Right.
Perhaps, in country, because the cost of then shipping in both directions, wherever you end up doing it,
it's not worth it.
It's not worth it, right?
There's another thing which you can do, which quite a few people are doing. That's what they call second life batteries, which is basically if a battery cannot run an electric vehicle, it could run something like a standby power supply, a stationary power supply, because first of all, the utilization of a standby power supply is hardly 2-3% of the time, and maybe for a very short duration, maybe for a few minutes or half an hour at the most, where the main supply goes off and then the battery kicks in through an inverter. For that, you can use batteries which have come out of vehicles, because you're keeping it fully charged all the time and depleting it to maybe about a few percent or maybe 10% at the most. And that way you can get another 5-6 years out of a used vehicle pack. After that, you can think of recycling materials.
That seems like also a very interesting opportunity.
Well, there's quite a few people who do that.
If a larger percentage of the power grid becomes based on renewable energy, and I think we know, although we probably don't want to admit it, that renewable energy, it tends to fluctuate in its availability based on the availability of sun and wind and stuff, that it seems like this idea then of creating perhaps a whole house voltage regulator for all intent purposes out of these second life batteries. I mean, it seems to me that you could actually create a solution hand in hand, knowing that you may have a problem with 10, 20, 30% of your generation coming from renewables, but you can solve the brownout problem with, a whole house battery backup.
Yes. In fact, it started quite a few years back when a heck of a lot of batteries came out of the lead acid, the car and truck businesses. There's quite a few companies, but unfortunately, they're not as many as there should be who utilize these batteries for their second life. So I think that's an area which lots of people can get into, and that's a lot of fun. It's electronics for starters. And it's a battery management, because then what you need to do is you got to continuously monitor everything. If something goes wrong, indicate that so-and-so pack is to be replaced. Replace that. And there's a few people who make equipment for doing this sort of thing, and they run it as a continuous business, because they do not sell you the entire hardware. They lease it to you under the provision that if anything happens, if the cells go bad, they will replace it. They will monitor it online and replace it as and when it's required.
Wow. So UPS is a service.
Yes.
What a fascinating idea.
It's slowly picking up. It's not as popular as it should be, but it's going to happen.
We need a few more Texas winters.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In order to be able to sell the UPS solution as a service. Mm-hmm. What a fantastic idea. I'm sorry it's not my idea, but it's a fantastic idea nonetheless. What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Well, the popularity which it's gaining with high school kids. I would have thought that most high school kids, or high school graduates, or people in high school, or even in grade school for that matter, are more interested in communicating using the internet and using, regular social media. But I see that there are more and more kids who are interested in getting into ham radio, and boy, that is something you need. That at least in the U.S., you need a lot more technically qualified people who would like to work with their hands. And ham radio is one of the most. It's about the best way of getting into regular hands-on engineering. I can see that slowly happening, but it's taking longer than it should.
No, but you're the first one in 400 episodes that kind of have said that you think that there's a popularity among high school kids. What could we be doing better to create some kind of, I don't want to say trap, for catching high school kids and getting them interested in amateur radio when we know that they'll obviously only benefit their lives from having done it? What could we do better that we're not doing?
We have to have, there's a robotics club in just about every school, which is, every high school has some sort of robotics club. That way we should kind of create an amateur radio club in there with some of the local stalwarts. In fact, Dan started something like this a few years back at the Hands-On Museum in Ann Arbor. And unfortunately, the Hands-On Museum had only kids who were definitely not high school kids. They were kids from grade school or junior high. And they were more interested in all the, the things which they could touch and feel and what have you. And ham radio kind of took a backstage because of so much noise these kids were making that the radios wouldn't work well. I mean, you could hardly hear what was on the other side. So that was the beginning. But if this is moved over to schools and somehow you have a teacher who has a ham radio license, tries to make it more popular in the school, I think that'll pick up kids like crazy, because this is something which you can have kids making antennas, you can have kids making radios, and especially with the QRP stuff which is available right now, the kits which are available, like the ones which Farhan makes, or for that matter, which Hans from QRP Labs makes. Yeah, that sort of thing, you have to make it more popular, and you just have to push it into schools. I mean, you just have to have a few workshops there with the school authorities and say, okay, this has got to be pushed in. I don't see any other way.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. If we have anybody from the ARRL listening to this podcast, what we have to do is we have to increase the size of the Teachers Institute every summer at the ARRL from about 10 teachers to about 1,000 teachers in order to be able to drive it. We want to drive it deep into the schools. I mean, how many school kids are there in America? 150 million?
Possibly.
Yeah. We need to go deeper. Well, I think that's a great idea. One of the things I noticed for the first times I saw Nuts and Bolts magazine, and it reminded me of the kind of popular electronics of the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
It seems to me that there's more we can do there. We're kind of talking about, recruiting kids into amateur radio, but do you think that's the greatest challenge that we're facing in amateur radio now, or do you think it's something else?
I think that's what it is, because kids have a lot of spare time. And they spend it on all kinds of activities which can be directed to ham radio when it doesn't want to happen. I think that would be a good start if we have this more and more popular in schools. Well, they've taken the CW portion of it, the Morse portion of the test right out of the exam. So that makes it a little more popular. But for fellows like me who insist on using only CW, that doesn't make sense. But what I'm trying to get across is we just have to get this into schools. And maybe another way of doing it is to have these contacts on ARIS, the ISS from these schools. And that seems to be very few and far between. In fact, there was one in Detroit about 6 years back. And after that, in this general region, I haven't seen a single one. So that has to be popularized by some of the local clubs. And once kids get to see that they can actually talk to an astronaut who is flying at 19,000 miles an hour above their heads, or 200 miles above their head, that will change their minds a bit about what is actually out there and what they can do.
I think just about every astronaut in the space station is a ham now, right?
Yes.
So what an opportunity that... Again, I think it's just the availability of ham radio bodies to be able to implement.
That's true. But there are so many like in Ann Arbor itself, there are 130 ham radio operators. Now, you get on the radio, you hear maybe one or two of them every evening. That's about it. And every Monday, they have their nets and they chew about, the rag chew about all kinds of stuff. But once they get, focused onto something like, okay, let's have let's go to so-and-so school, and then just convince them that they should have a program which will allow them to communicate to the satellites, to at least the ISS. and set up something with the ISS administration which allows them to get a spot. I think that would go a long way, and that should be more regular. Right now, it's very, very spotty.
Do you get a chance to go back to India and see what's happening in amateur radio there?
I haven't gone in the last 3 years, but I will be going this year, and I'll spend a lot of time in Farhan's paradise and see what he's up to there. Yes, that should be fun.
No, I think that would be great. One of the benefits that we all got being together at FDIM and Hamvention is we all came home with COVID.
Yes, that's very unfortunate. Yes. In fact, I'm seriously thinking of avoiding the field day because I am scared. I don't want to go through another 2 weeks of this mess.
I'm still feeling the effects of it.
Yes.
But I'm glad that I didn't go to my father after the convention, my 92-year-old father. I actually went and visited before because I knew that if I was going to get something, I was going to get it there.
Well, I didn't have much of an option. I came back home. Then I had one 89-year-old aunt who was visiting me, along with her kid, her son-in-law, and their kid, my wife, and my son, all in the same house. Everybody got COVID. So I'm a pretty good spreader.
It sounds to me like you are.
So,
Arun, do you have advice that you'd give to new or returning hams to amateur radio?
Well, get on the air is the very first thing. Just get on the air, and we have a station doing that. It's called the GOTA, GOTA, which is get on the air station, which will be on field day. But I think we got to make it more popular, and then anybody who has not done ham radio in years, the first thing there's so much equipment available everywhere. You can go to eBay and buy it if you want. If you don't want to spend the money, just connect an antenna and talk.
As I say in every episode, all of us who've been in ham radio for a while have radios everywhere ourselves, under our desks, in our attics, right? All people have to do really is ask us. But what do you think about this? It's better to ask the ham radio operator on your block, in your neighborhood, in your town, for what's under his desk so that he'll come and actually help you get it on the air.
Exactly.
Right. So don't send me messages unless you're in Jerusalem. For my gear, I'm happy to supply, but it seems to me that the best part about this kind of an ask is to ask the local guy to be your Elmer, to be your mentor.
Right. I have started 4 or 5 fellows. I've got licenses for 4 or 5 guys who used to work with me. So I think my quota is not complete. I need more fellows. In my present work, we have about 130 guys working with us, and I think 3 people are already in the line to get licenses. So I'm trying to make it as popular as possible, but it's a bit rough. I mean, we have a full schedule from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 in the evening. So
anyone that reads your LinkedIn page and reads the recommendations about you on the LinkedIn page knows that you're a fine manager and employer and entrepreneur. So I have one last question. When you are looking to hire someone in your company, in your project or whatever, does having an amateur radio license, does that help at all from your standpoint?
If the resume comes in and it says amateur radio license, call sign so-and-so, I don't even interview the guy. I hire him straight away. I know the guy can work.
Isn't that amazing?
That's the way it is with me.
It's such a pleasure to see you on Skype again, and you were a fine driver for me at Hamvention, and I had such a great time spending time with you and Asher Farhan.
Same here. Oh, by the way, his radio is with me, and I've got it working on FT8. It is a gem. Did you get a chance to see his new SBTX?
I got a chance, but I'm anxious to see it go into production.
Right. He said it would be running by the end of this month, but there are still some bugs. Like if you touch any key, it'll automatically start transmitting. So there are a few things that he needs to work out. But as far as FT8 is concerned, it works like a charm. I mean, I had it connected to a piece of wire outside my window because I just wanted to listen to what FT8 or what the signals can come out of FT8. And then I just typed in my call sign with the other guy's call sign and with the report. And I just waited till that blank period showed up and I hit enter. Boy, he called me back. I mean, I had how many? Maybe a watt or 3 watts coming out of it. Totally untuned antenna, 14077, if I'm not mistaken. And it worked. And I told him that, look, I got 4 contacts this way. He said, are you crazy? You sure you're not lying to me? I said, no, the darn thing works. And now he's putting more bells and whistles into it.
That's not surprising. And if you're a new ham, that's an amazing way. The whole BitX line, all of his projects, they're an amazing way to get on the air and to gain some expertise at the same time. So if you're a new ham, we'll put a link to that in the show notes page as well.
Yeah, even the QRP Labs things, it's phenomenal. I mean, they just get one of their kits, put them together, and that can be a club activity, like what we have in the local Arrow thing.
Exactly right. I think the club activity could be winding the toroids.
That is true. That's true.
That takes a little bit of...
It takes a little bit of effort, and I don't know whether that'll be very popular.
If you do it, and you do it right so that it measures the right inductance, then you have this feeling of accomplishment.
That is true. Yes.
Then you have a new skill that you can put on your resume.
Yes.
Arun, thanks you so much. I so appreciate your agreeing to be a guest on the QSO Today podcast. With that, I want to wish you thank you and 73.
Thank you, 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Arun. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W8ARU in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to ICOM America for its support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of ICOM America by clicking on their banner in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any other episode into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages, or use my Amazon link before shopping at Amazon. Amazon gives me a small commission on your purchases while at the same time protecting your privacy. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as I head towards episode 400. QSO Today is now available in the iHeart Radio, Spotify, YouTube, and a bunch of other online audio services, including the iTunes Store. Look on the right side of the show notes pages for a listing of these services. You can use the Amazon Echo and say, Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who edits every single show and allows both this host and my guest to sound brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Until next time, this is Eric, 4Z1UG, 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.